This is Research Like a Pro, episode 230, Finding a Female's Father, Research Logging and Report Writing. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Hi everyone, welcome to Research Like a Pro.
Hi Nicole, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I've been having fun playing with the MyHeritage artificial intelligence time machine.
Oh, me too.
That has been so interesting, plugging in, photographs of myself and my family and seeing us transported in time to be back in the American frontier or French 18th century time period. And it's fun because they show you pictures of yourself at that time period.
It is really fun, and I found that some of them were better than others. You know, some of the ones where you're standing, the face was kind of weird looking, but I really like my closer up ones. And I know it all depends on what kind of pictures you send them. You have to upload pictures of yourself in all different angles, and they want just pictures of you. So that can be tricky, finding just you by yourself, not with a bunch of other people. So I think it really depends a lot on what you send them. And I know I sent some of when I was younger, some, just really recent. So that was kind of fun too, to see the conglomerate.
When I was reading the FAQs at the bottom, it was like, just send pictures of yourself all within 3 years. And I think it confuses the AI if you send old ones too. So maybe just choose a time period of pictures to send, like the last 3 years. And then if you don't have any pictures by yourself, it's pretty easy to have someone just take 10 pictures of you and send them in.
Different angles, full body shots. It was fun.
Yeah. So how are you doing? What have you been working on?
I've been working on getting some client projects finished up and sent out. And one of them was so interesting. I think this happens a lot. We have a woman who is just named in a child's death certificate, and she has just a first name. And so that was this latest project that I reviewed. And it was through DNA, through the network graphs, that we discovered this really substantial group of DNA matches to a certain surname in Arkansas that lined up with where the family was living. And so we now have a very probable family of origin for this woman who only had a name in a death certificate created like 100 years after her life. So it's really neat to see what DNA can do.
It is, and it makes me wonder if Susan ever had her name recorded anywhere else other than that one place, because there were burned counties. And it's just amazing how DNA can open up that possibility of, okay, maybe she was a daughter of this family. We've got a couple here. We've got clusters from the mother side of the couple, clusters from the father side of the couple. And so it's really showing that she's probably a child of this couple, but there's just not going to be any documents.
Right,
probably.
Right. This family lived in an area of Arkansas, and all three counties that are all clustered there together up in the top, the northeastern part, are severely burned counties. So no marriage records, no probate records, no deeds until the late 1880s. And that is what we rely on. If you have a marriage record, that's so helpful with getting a maiden name, of course, and then also can point to other associates that are in the record to give you clues. Or the same way with probate, a man leaving property to a daughter or deeding property to a daughter, but without any of those records, you are pretty well stuck. And so many of our brick walls are just like that. And that's actually what we're talking about today, in my same scenario with my Clemsy Cline. So we are excited about DNA, that's for sure.
Right. Well, let's talk about your project. So when we're researching female ancestors who don't have very many records naming them, it's helpful to do that research for their friends, associates, and neighbors, that cluster of people around them in their community. And this works for males as well. But for this project, we get to focus on our female ancestor, Clemsy Cline. We think her full name was Mary Clemsy Cline, and she was born about 1817 in Alabama and died after 1880 in Wise County, Texas. And the original analysis showed three individuals that were part of the community. So Jacob Cline, John Cline, and Mahala Cline. And there were three locations for research: Morgan County, Missouri, Wayne County, Kentucky, and Izard County, Arkansas. And so after creating a locality guide and looking into those counties, there was a research plan created. So now we're going to talk about the findings and the conclusions that came from this research project. So, Diana, how did you set up your research log?
Well, I love the Airtable research log, and I had initially done a research log for Clemsy in a Google Sheet. So I transferred everything over to Airtable, and I knew that I was going to add DNA to this project, so I have all those DNA tables to use later on, but I just kind of moved them all to the side. You can move those all over to the side, and I focus on the timeline. I had a timeline for Clemsy, but her husband is a Weatherford, and so I also have a timeline for Weatherfords because I was trying to understand some of the different Weatherfords that were in the family tree, and I wasn't sure if that would be important to my project or not. So because this was my first time logging this in Airtable, I just set up a timeline for her husband and his clan, and then for the Clines and all of those related people. And then I also had an old census study of the 1850 census of Morgan County, and I put that in there too. I just wanted to have one Airtable base for all of these different pieces of projects I'd done over many years. So it's really nice to have them all combined, and it's easy to copy over from an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet spreadsheet to, an Airtable base. So now I have all my research on this family in one place. But then I created a new research log just for this project. And in our template, we have all the basic fields for a research log, date, locality, source citation, notes, comments, those types of things. But I also added a field, and if you don't know about Airtable, that means a column. So I added a field for person because I was tracking Clemsy's fan club, her friends, associates, and neighbors, and I had already discovered several that I wanted to track. And if I have a special field just for them and I can just enter their name, like Mahala Cline, Jacob Cline, John Cline, then when I am doing my analysis, I can group the log by that person and have just a little mini timeline of just each person. And then I can ungroup it to put them all back into chronological order, or group it just by locality to see all the records for, say, Wayne County, Kentucky. So I just added that field of person, which is really, really helpful. The other thing that happens with Airtable, if you have more than one person in a record, so let's say I put Jacob Cline Jr. and there's a Jacob Cline Sr., I put them both in that field. Well, then when you do your grouping, it puts them in their own special little group. All the people that you put together show up together in their own group. So that's kind of neat because then you can see all the records that people showed up in the same place.
So, did they appear in their own grouping as well, and the one where they're together?
No, they don't. So Airtable just puts them into a separate group. So that's something you have to be aware of. And so you might want to have separate rows for each person. So in this instance, it was a county history that they were both mentioned in. It was a county history for Jacob Cline Jr., and then he tells the story, or whoever's writing it tells the story of his father's coming into the county. So if I don't want to have them grouped together, then I could just do a separate row and just have each one separate.
You know what you could do, this might work better, is if you're wanting to see all of the rows that mention one person, like Jacob Cline Jr., you could, instead of grouping it, you could just go up to filter and choose to filter just to records that mention Jacob Cline Jr., and then they would all be listed in the result.
That is true. Filters are great. And then you eliminate all the other people that are I shouldn't say messing up your research log, but that are all interspersed through it. So that's a great feature also of the filters.
Yeah, I've been using the filters a lot lately, and it works really well for that kind of thing. And then the grouping works really well when you just have one person or thing per
row.
per cell or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
but if you have the two, then it makes those special groupings where like, okay, this has Jacob Klein and Jacob Klein Jr. and
Yeah.
Jacob Klein Sr. and there's just one record with both of them, and that's a special little group, and that's not as useful.
I agree. I agree. I love that idea of just using the filters to see everyone or just to see all the records for one person. Yeah, the flexibility of Airtable and doing the analysis is so nice. I like it because it's so easy to use. I know you can do some of these same types of things with Excel, but I'm not a Power Excel user. And so with Airtable, it's really easy. And I can go back and forth with grouping, ungrouping, sorting, unsorting. So I do love that.
Going back to the Kleins and the Weatherfords, so we hadn't really read the research objective, but basically your objective is to find somebody who could have been Mary Clemsy Cline's father. And all you know is that she married William Henderson Weatherford about 1839 in Arkansas. So that's great that you were able to include information about the Weatherford family in your log because they are part of her fan club. You know, she married into the Weatherford family, and it's important to look at records for the Weatherford family as well and just make sure you're not missing any clues from their family associations with Kleins out there, maybe, and kind of gathering up all of the relevant details from her whole fan club.
That's exactly right, because her husband is a very important part of that, fan club. And so I felt like I did have to do a timeline for the Weatherfords just to put her in context. And I discovered in doing that none of them were in Morgan County, Missouri at all, where this cluster of Kleins were appearing. They were just out in Texas. And so there were no Kleins out in Texas that I could see around them. So I decided to just put them aside and not focus on them for this project.
Yeah, that's really great that seeing that they're not around kind of makes you think, okay, the reason they're in this locality is not for the Weatherford family, it's for the Klein family.
Exactly. And it looked like they moved to Texas to be near the Weatherford family. So it kind of helps the migration pattern to make sense because it seemed pretty family based.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, you did your research, you recorded it in Airtable. In your various tables, you had a timeline table, you had another timeline table, then you had your research log table. So you've got everything organized in Airtable. Now you're ready to write the research report. So, how did you set up your report?
Well, it was really an interesting project because usually I do this all within a few weeks or days. I'm doing it very focused. But this time, because I was doing it as part of our study group, I had done the research and then we went on this trip, a 10-day trip to Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri. And then I came home and was writing the report. So it's a little tricky when you're breaking things up because your mind has not been on this research. But I was really, really happy because as I was researching, I kept it in Airtable, but I had a specific bit of the research that was more complicated, and I decided to write that up as I was doing the research, and I'm so glad I did because when I came back and couldn't remember anything about this project, I read that and I brought it all back. So that's just a little plug for writing some things as you go. And what I wrote about was tax records and land patents in Izard County, Arkansas, and it was just confusing. It helped me work through it as I was writing. So for this project, I did a little bit of writing as you go, and then of course I just pulled it all together from the research log for the final report. So that said, my report template has basic categories: the objective, limitations, results summary, background information, research findings, conclusion, and future research suggestions. And I love having a template because I just have to look at that section and then start writing. So very, very helpful to give me the skeleton of a report.
Perfect. Well, the first section is the objective. Putting that at the top of the report is helpful for the reader and the writer to remember exactly the purpose of that phase of research. So, the overarching research question is to discover Clemsy Cline's father. But in this phase, you were just focusing on finding a candidate for the father that you could then test with DNA evidence.
Right. I knew that there was no way I was going to find her father in this project. And I did set a limitation for myself, just like I do with clients, to try to limit this to about 20 hours. And the reason I say 20 hours is because if you give yourself unlimited amount of time to research and write, your report could be really, really long. Like if you're researching for 30 or 40 hours and you go to write it up, that can be overwhelming. Whereas if you
Yes.
just research for 10 hours and then you write for another 10, that is a report you can actually do. It turns out to be maybe 20, 25 pages. You can actually read that again and understand what this particular phase was about. So I highly recommend not having overlong research projects.
Yeah, it's hard to write a report that's that long. It just takes a long time.
It does, and this one actually turned out to be just 14 pages. I didn't put a ton of images or tables or things in it, and that's probably why sometimes if I add a lot of those, it'll be longer. But one other limitation that we've already talked about a little bit was this record loss. Izard County, Arkansas is a key location, and their courthouse burned twice, and so before 1889, there's just hardly anything. And that's really limiting when your ancestor lived there in the 1830s and 1840s. So that was a big limitation. And I like putting that in a section at the beginning. So anybody reading my report is not going to wonder what my problem was and why I couldn't find things. They'll know right up front. Okay, we only spent 20 hours and it was a limitation of record loss. So that can be helpful to put your limitations in.
All right, the next section is the results summary. And usually this is written at the end of the report writing phase, but then we insert at the beginning, kind of like an executive summary to summarize kind of what was found, just a quick bulleted list or a paragraph that says, here's what was found in this phase.
Yeah, and I like doing that just so I can really quickly review and remember what this project was about, what I found. I don't add source citations. It's just easy to write. You're just summarizing what you did, and I do that at the end. I do like the way I'm doing it now with grouping things a little bit more than having so many just specific bullet points. I think it makes it easier to read and to understand. So in my results summary, the first one, I talked about some of the background information, and then I started talking about the Izard County, Arkansas research, and then I shifted to the Wayne County research, and then finally talked a little bit about discounting a Virginia connection. So I really like doing it that way.
Well, what was the next part of the report?
Next part is the background information, and this is where I discuss the problem with researching a female in the early 1800s. And then it gave me a chance to talk about what I actually knew about Clemsy based on the research that we had done previously, and that was just 3 censuses of her life. As a typical female, that is all I had. And so I talked about those and the localities of those and the information gleaned from that. And then I talked about her fans. And those were identified from the 1850 census. That was a key census. It was the first one that she's named. Before, she would just be in the household of her husband as a tick mark. And really important was in the 1850 census, she has a family of Clines living just a few households away. This is Jacob Cline. And then Jacob Cline has a Mahala Cline in his household as a boarder. In the 1850 census, they were instructed to have the head of household, the wife, the children, and then any other people like boarders or laborers. And so Mahala is separated. She's at the end of the group with a Robert Cline, age 5. Mahala's 22. I thought, okay, this is not coincidence. Plus, in Clemsy and Henderson Weatherford's household on that same census, they have 2 Cline children in their household listed at the end as boarders. So I just had a feeling, these people are all important. They're all connected somehow. So anyway, my background information explains that. And then I give just a little bit of a hypothesis about Clemsy's father. And I hypothesized he would have been born in Virginia before 1800, and that perhaps he migrated south to Alabama, where he met Clemsy's mother, reportedly born in Georgia. So Clemsy lived long enough to have the 1880 census. She's the head of household. She reports her father's born in Virginia and her mother in Georgia, assuming that she gave the information. So I put in my hypothesis so that I kind of have an idea of what her family makeup would have been like. And I hypothesized that her parents could have been married about 1815 or before. So that was all in my background.
I have a question about the 1850 censuses that you were talking about. So you had said the instructions to the 1850 census takers was to include all of the household members first and then anyone else like boarders afterward. But I'm looking at your report and you do talk about the 1850 census does not state relationships. And then you have this citation to the 1850 census instructions about how they were instructed to list the head of household, the wife, the children, and then the other household members, such as laborers or boarders. And that's so helpful.
It is helpful because just knowing what they were supposed to do, whether they followed the instructions or not, is really good information for us when analyzing these records. So sometimes we want to study the record and its formation and instructions as much as we do the information in it because it gives us more clues to what is in that record.
Right. And it's so easy to just say, oh, well, the 1850 census doesn't give relationships. So we just don't even know who these people are. But no, we can actually go and make a more educated guess and a better hypothesis. And I love that you have done that here with these clients who are listed in the household with Henderson and Clemsy Weatherford. Talitha and John Cline are there. And then the same with Jacob Cline's family, how he has a Mahala Cline and a Robert Cline. And, maybe the Cline family, the parents must have died because these people don't have anywhere else to live except for with their probable siblings.
That is exactly what I am thinking with wanting to trace them because it's just too much of a coincidence, right? So the other thing I pointed out in the report on this part was that Mahala was born in Alabama and Clemsy was born in Alabama. So those are two, kind of random locations where everybody else is born in different places. And then there's these three younger Cline children, Robert, Talitha, and John, in two different households that are all born in Arkansas. So it seems like somebody was pretty careful in noting locations,
Yeah.
rather than just like, oh, everybody's born in Missouri because they're in Missouri. Sometimes we'll see censuses like that.
Oh, I hate those kind.
So when you see really specific things, then you can go, okay, the head of household likely gave good information here. So I like that.
Right. And I like how you've abstracted or extracted the census data just in a simple bulleted list. It's not a super fancy table that would have taken longer. Like there are a lot of ways to present information, and this way works really well here for the 1850 census. You just have each person, their age and their birthplace, and then the head of household, you added the occupation and how much they owned in real and personal estate. And that just worked really nicely.
And it makes it a lot faster for me when I'm trying to stay within a time limit because I've already put that information in my Airtable log in a cell. So I can literally copy and paste that into my report, adjust the formatting a little bit, and it's really easy. You can spend a lot of time doing a complicated census table, and I recommend that if it's a complicated census, 1900, 1910, where you're trying to show parents' birthplaces and so much information. But for something like this, it worked really well. And then I bolded people who were the probable boarders in the household just to show in the report. These are the extra people, and let's just take a look at them.
Yeah, so this was in background information because you already had found these census records in the past and you kind of were starting with this as your starting point, right?
Exactly. And I knew that there were these Clines. I'd looked at this before, but I'd never done a focused report on them. It's one of those situations where you have a feeling you should research it more, but you just haven't done it yet.
You're like, I know there's something here, but
it's going to be hard.
Until you dive in and really do it, then you don't really know what it means.
Yeah.
And that's exciting when you have these good clues like this with, you knew Clemsy's maiden name. Remind me how you knew her maiden name was Cline.
She has two children. One is our ancestor, Isabella Weatherford, and then the other one is Samuel Weatherford, who is living with Clemsy in 1880. They both have death certificates that name their mother's maiden name as Cline.
Oh, perfect.
And so correlating that with the people in her household, these Clines actually in her household, and then Jacob Cline a few households down. I didn't really have a question that she wasn't a Cline. It all came together.
You've just always known that she's a Cline.
Yeah.
And it seems like the family knew she was a Cline too.
Yeah.
The informants for Isabella and Samuel knew that there was the Cline family, that was where she originated.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if she did keep in touch with her Cline family later on. I would love to find
after
evidence
leaving
of that.
them behind and going to Texas.
Well, that'd be so fun if I actually find something, like one of her sisters that we don't know about that married someone and they're just living right there by her. That can happen. So,
Oh, yeah. That's happened to me a few times in Texas where you see the census page, you don't recognize any names. Then later you come back to that same page to look to because you're tracing a sister forward and you're like, oh, I've already been here before. I've seen this page
oh,
before.
there they are.
They're right next door.
Yeah, yeah. So, especially where Samuel was born a little bit later, he was born in Texas. So, either the family, she kept alive, her maiden name of Cline, kept in contact with Cline family. He knew it. I love that little bit of a clue. Somebody knew that.
Well, good job on your background section. And just so everyone knows, Diana has shared her report for all of you to go and read. So make sure that you take advantage of that. You can go look at the PDF and read the whole thing. Okay, so let's go on next to the research findings section. So this is the part of the report that, is the longest part. It has all the new findings from this phase of research after following the research plan, following the clues that were in this background analysis, and what was new that was found. So it's helpful to break this up with subheadings and figures and maps, bulleted lists, anything to help the reader. Here are the headings for this research project. First, there was Izard County, Arkansas, and then the next section was Arkansas tax and land records. Then there's a section on John C. Cline, then a section on Mahala Cline, then Jacob Cline of Morgan County, Missouri, then Rockingham County, Virginia Cline connections. So let's go through these sections. Tell us about the first one.
Well, I wanted to start with Izard County, Arkansas, because that was the earliest known location for Clemsy and Henderson Weatherford. He had been found in the tax lists for 1839 and 1845, and that was the very earliest that I had them. So I hypothesized they were married about 1838 because their oldest daughter was born about 1839, 1840. And so I figured that would be a good place to start. Is this where they met? Is this where Clemsy was a young woman and she met Henderson? So I wanted to start there. And knowing that Izard County was severely burned, I knew there were these tax lists, and I knew we had federal land patents. Those were two records that do exist for the area. And so I had to go back up to the family history library where the tax book is. And I was excited to find a Cline. I found a John C. Cline and tax records for him. His first tax was in 1841, and he paid a poll tax and a land tax for 2 land plats. And then he wasn't anywhere else in the tax lists. The problem is that even though we have some of these tax lists, there are still some gaps, as you can imagine, just they didn't get all of them saved. Oh. But I at least found John C. Cline. So I knew that there was a Cline, but I didn't know anything about him. The tax list only said he paid a poll tax, so I knew he was between 21 and 60. That's a pretty big range.
Mm-hmm.
Is he a contemporary of Clemsy or a possible father?
So in 1841, he paid a poll tax and his land. So that's good. You found that?
Yeah.
But that's interesting that he wasn't on any other tax list, even though there was the 1839 and 1843, 1844.
Yeah, and it's just, I think, one of those instances of just not having complete records, possibly. Who knows? But when I went to federal land patents, that was fun. There was no federal land patent for Henderson Weatherford, but I did find more Clines. I found John C. Cline, and the land description matched up with his land description in the tax record, so that correlated great. But then I found a Mahala Cline and a John Cline. And I was really excited to see the name Mahala Cline because I felt like that correlated well with the Mahala Cline on that 1850 census. So that was exciting.
That is. She must have been a widow to be patenting land.
That was my hypothesis. I'm still not sure about that, and I'll reveal a little bit more of that in a minute. So, as you can imagine, I had all these Clines, and I had the tax records, and I have these different land descriptions, but I couldn't quite visualize them, and so I created my own little annotated map and put a star on where they would have been in the county. In one of the books that I was using, I found a map of Izard County with the sections all, drawn out. And so I could actually figure out where they were in this county. And so, for instance, John Cline was the northwest southeast section 1, Range 9 West, Township 18 North. And when you're reading those descriptions, you're thinking, okay, I really have no idea where this is. But when you plot it out, then you can make much better conclusions. So what I noticed was that Mahala got a bit of land very close to John C. Cline. And he got his land patent in 1844. She got hers in 1848 in both instances. So I thought that was very interesting. Could she be a daughter of John C. Cline and possibly got old enough that she could patent land on her own? I don't know. I just thought that was very interesting. There's a connection there. And then this John Cline has 3 land patents in a little bit different area. I mean, not super far away, but he's got 3 all in his own place. But his were later. His were 2 for 1849 and 1 for 1850. So I have this little group of John C., and Mahala Cline, all pretty close. I mean, looking at it, they're probably just within a few miles of each other. So that was a really nice little grouping of Clines to find. And I like the naming patterns that I was seeing there. One more thing I want to say is I looked at the actual image on the Bureau of Land Management website. You can click on the image and see the final land patent image. And it was interesting because Mahala was of Fulton County and John Cline was of Fulton County and then of Pulaski County. So then I looked at my maps, and Fulton County had been created from Izard. It's right on the border. And so that makes sense. You know, they created a new county and they ended up living in Fulton, even though they were patenting this land in Izard. And of course, I was excited about Fulton County as a new area to research until I found out it was also severely burned and didn't have records there either.
No.
Yeah, so anyway, Pulaski is a possible. That one did not burn, but Pulaski's in the central part of the state. So not sure what's going on with this John Cline of Pulaski and of Fulton. So future research on that for sure.
Great. So to summarize this section on Izard County tax and land records, you found some Clines in land and tax. You mapped them out to see that they were all next to each other. Just a question, how did that correlate with Henderson Weatherford and his location at that time?
Oh my gosh, it's so sad. He only paid a poll tax, and the tax list gives no land description. And it's a book, so it's just alphabetical. I don't have anything else as a clue of where he was living in Izard County. And I've never been able to find him on the 1840 census of Izard County, and I did a page-by-page search and cannot find their family. So I don't know if they're living with someone else or if for a brief time they popped over to a different county. So I don't know where his are. I wish I knew exactly that Henderson was right there. You know, that'd be great.
So you have Henderson Weatherford on the 1839 and 1845 tax list in Izard.
Exactly.
But just don't know exactly where.
Yep.
And was it organized by district or something?
Nope, it's just alphabetical. These
for the whole county, it was just one big alphabetical list?
Yes, and it's not the original list. So those...
Is it like the state copy?
Yeah, it's the compiler is Desmond Walls Allen, and so he has just gone through and made this book. He has compiled a book, and you find chronologically your ancestor's name, and then it tells you the year and any other information. And so he's done a great service in compiling all these records. And I don't even think that they are available anymore because I couldn't find anywhere to see the originals. For some of the areas, he's done this for several counties in Arkansas. For some of them, the Arkansas archives have them, but they don't have Izard's. So really the only source I have is this book.
Well, that's frustrating, but at least you have that. And it is cool that you can put Henderson Weatherford and Jacob C. Cline in the same county in the 1840s. That's cool.
Yeah.
Great. So next you had a section on John C. Cline. So tell us the findings for that section.
Well, I was pretty excited to find John C. Cline, to find another person to research. And so I didn't have this in my original research plan to research him because I didn't know about him, right? But I added that, and when we teach research planning, we always show it as a kind of a winding road, and this is a good example of that. Because, of course, I can't just let him go. I've got to find him. And he was right there on the 1850 census, and he was in Fulton County. So that new county that had been made of Izard, And his household was very interesting. It had a Milky Cline, age 43. First of all, Jacob is 65. So immediately we know he could be a father for Clemsy. He's old enough. But he has this much younger woman, 20 years younger, Milky Cline, as a probable wife. Again, no relationships, but that was to be the order. And then he's got 4 Cline children, Jesse, Abner, Ann, and Amanda. The older 2 born in Illinois, the younger 2 in Arkansas. John was born in Pennsylvania. Milky's born in Virginia. So again, wow, that's pointing to some migration, isn't it?
Right. And that is so common for that time period in the 1800s with people leaving Virginia and going out to these new lands that were opening up. I'm just having to try and remember, when was Clemsy born?
Okay, so I had done a hypothesis of her birth year based on those 3 censuses, because of course they're all different. One says 1817, one says 1820, and one 1825. But I think between 1817 and 1820 are more accurate. The one that says 1825 has a bunch of stuff wrong on the family. I just feel like it's one of those outliers that whoever gave the information didn't know the family well.
Okay, so let's say she's born in 1820. John C. Cline in 1850.
So he would have been born about 1785.
Okay, great. So he's definitely of age to
Yes.
be the father.
Yes. And he could be the father of Jacob Cline of Morgan County, the guy who's right by Clemsy. Jacob Cline has a birth year pretty solid of 1811 because of his headstone. We have his burial. So I'm figuring he could be an older brother for Clemsy, and that would still fit with being a son of John C. Cline. That's still
Oh,
possible.
great. So you've got this all kind of hypothesized out in your mind now, with this guy is probably the dad, and we've got a brother and a sister possibly. That's cool.
Right. And Mahala, born about 1828, according to that 1850 census again, could be a younger daughter. They all 3 could be his child. So that was really exciting to find him and see how old he was, because I finally have a candidate for somebody. And I love having some children there to follow for descendancy for DNA. I mean, that's super exciting.
Totally. And what about this Milky? I mean, first of all, I've never heard of someone named Milky, like milk with a Y.
I know, right? I don't know about Milky. She's 43. She could be, as we know, in 1850, she could be a first, second, or third wife. Who knows? We don't know about her yet. But I did find, going back another 10 years to the 1840 census, I did find a John Cline in the Blue Mountain Township of Izard County, Arkansas. And that household correlates really well with the 1850 census. And it does have 2 females, one of which could be Mahala. So that 1840 census, I was trying to decide, who could be in this family. It wouldn't have Clemsy in it because she was already married, I'm guessing. And so anyway, trying to do a little bit of figuring out with that census.
Yeah, I like that you've put those names, your hypothesis for who they match up with from the 1850 census, right there in brackets. So you think Clemsy and Henderson Weatherford got married around 1839 in Izard, but the marriage records are lost for that time period. And when did they have their first child? Like sometime right after that?
Yeah, Eliza is 10 on the 1850 census, so she was born about 1840. And I believe tracing her out, I found her birth date was a little bit closer to 1839, right in there, 3940.
Yeah, so you're thinking Clemsy and Henderson Weatherford married about 1838. They had a child around 1839. And so she wasn't in her father's household in 1840. So the 1840 census for John Cline still fits the hypothesis that he could have been the father of Clemsy.
Right, right. He is a little bit younger there, which is always tricky because he was supposedly 65 in 1850, and the 1840 census has him as 40 through 49. So he could have been 50, 65. I mean, those are the things we see, that not everything correlates perfectly, darn it, with the censuses. But the household makeup did correlate pretty well. So that, you just have to keep researching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little conflict there, but
Mm-hmm.
When people were older like that, often their ages changed a lot on the census and they're not always perfectly lined up.
Yeah, he could have been just 60.
All right. Well, next in your report, you had your section on Mahala. So tell us, did you find more about her?
Yes, I did. And I basically said the Mahala Cline who patented land in 1848 could be the Mahala Cline who lived with the Jacob Cline household in 1850 in Morgan County. That's why we always use qualifiers like likely, could be, probably, possibly. But I did want to discover more about the Mahala who was 22 years old as a boarder in Jacob Cline's household, because I wasn't sure if she was a widow or not. Had she been married and her husband died, and that's why she moved to Morgan County to be with perhaps her brother and sister? And so I did some more research on her, found that she married Thomas Shockley in 1854 in Morgan County, Missouri. And again, I thought, okay, she could have just been going by her maiden name, right? We see women whose husbands died and they're widows, and then they use their former married name. They don't go back to a maiden name in a marriage record. So I hypothesized she still could have been a widow when she got married. But following them, they were quite easy to research, found them in the censuses in Missouri, just boom, boom, boom. Found they had at least 5 daughters, and she died in 1899. And one of her daughters lived all the way till 1965, and her death certificate states her parents as Mahala Cline and Thomas Shockley. So that tells me that her maiden name was a Cline.
Nice.
So that clarifies that she was an unmarried woman, and she could be a sibling to Clemsy and Jacob.
So interesting that she had land in her name at such a young age.
I know. And
as a single woman.
And I'm really excited because my next phase of research, I'm going to order the land patent applications and see if that gives me any clues to all these clients in Arkansas. Sometimes those applications do give some information. Often they don't, but it is something else to look at. But I was excited when I found that she was a Cline. It seemed like she was not a widow and married to a Cline. And it also raised the question of these other Cline children. So she has a Robert Cline, age 5, with her in that Jacob Cline household. And then Clemsy and Henderson Weatherford have these 2 Cline children, Talitha, age 10, and John, age 8. So don't really know exactly who all these people are, but getting a little bit closer. So one other thing I wanted to talk about was the exciting thing about finding Mahala Cline and Thomas Shockley and their household of daughters. I have a mitochondrial DNA test taker for Clemsy, who's already taken the test. I have those results. So if I can trace down those daughters, I could maybe find a mitochondrial DNA test taker to compare with our test taker.
So a matrilineal descendant of Clemsy has tested. Now we just need a matrilineal descendant of Mahala Cline to test. So wonderful. That's really exciting because we already have our person out there waiting for results and waiting for matches.
I know. And I figured, with that many daughters, 5 daughters, somebody's got to have another daughter who had a daughter, right?
Yeah, you have a good chance there. That's nice that you can work on tracing that forward in the future research. Well, we've talked a lot about Jacob, so tell us what you found about Jacob Cline next.
Well, I was excited to tackle Jacob in Wayne County, Kentucky. The county histories talk about him coming from Wayne County, Kentucky with his wife's family, the Ards, A-R-D. And so I went to Wayne County, did some original research there, found Jacob Cline and Talitha Ard married on 18 March 1835. And looking at the marriage register, no witnesses, parents, no other Clines. What I found was that he paid a poll tax in Wayne County in 1835 and 36, so right there when he's getting married. And he never owned any land, but he was taxed for 2 horses by 1836. And then he disappears. There are no other Clines in land or tax records for Wayne County whatsoever, which suggested that he just traveled to the county as a single man. He wasn't there with a group of Clines because Wayne County has existing tax and land and census. There was just nothing else except for just this brief period of time where he marries Talitha, and then they take off with this whole group of Ards to Morgan County, Missouri.
Oh, so Talitha Ard's family we're all going to Morgan
Right,
County.
right. So that leaves me with my hypothesis that he could have originated down in Izard County, Arkansas. Then he could have just taken off by himself, as an adventurer for whatever reason, and gone up to Kentucky. Who knows what the pull was there? And then, got married and moved with the Ards, which, if he was settled in Morgan County, and there was something that happened down in Arkansas, and Clemsy Cline and Henderson Weatherford and Mahala Cline all needed someplace to go, they could go up, and they were near Jacob in Morgan County.
That makes sense that if their father died, they needed somewhere to live, and their older brother had set up a nice house. They could have come and lived with him.
Right. So, kind of drawing a few more lines in the picture of this family. So it was good to know that there wasn't just a whole group of Clines in Kentucky that I needed to worry about. Sometimes negative searches are great, and it does become negative evidence that Jacob was just there by himself, which I do like that. I also wanted to do a little bit more in Morgan County. I was hoping to find maybe more information about Jacob. You would think there would be quite a bit because the county history talked about him being a doctor. I just really couldn't find much more about him. But I did find where he was buried. There's the Cline Cemetery, which I already knew, but in one of the books I used at the Family History Library, there was a map of all the cemeteries in Morgan County, which is super cool.
Nice.
So I located where he was. Had moved up to more the northern part of the county. In the census in 1850, the Weatherfords and Clines were all down in Buffalo Township, which is the southwest corner. So they had taken off to Texas by 1860, and he'd moved north by 1860. One other thing was very, very interesting. So online trees have the father of Jacob Cline as being a John Cline out of Rockingham County, Virginia. And so far, I have just found nothing to show that. Jacob does have Virginia as his birthplace. So that's it for the 1850 census. We have that. And as I was looking at county histories for Morgan County, I found this Daniel Cline. And he was born in 1846. He was the son of Samuel Cline and Elizabeth Showalter, German immigrants to Rockingham County. And Daniel didn't migrate to Missouri until 1878. Jacob Cline was long dead by then, so I don't think there's even a connection, quite honestly. I mean, maybe there is, and I'm just hypothesizing that maybe people just found Daniel Cline coming from Rockingham County and assumed that was Jacob's birthplace. I don't know, but that was the only place I found anything about Rockingham County as a possible location for Jacob, and it's not even for him, really.
Well, it is good to put that in there and to just, get those clues written down so you don't forget them. And who knows what that all means, but it's helpful to see, okay, there's a couple Rockingham County, Virginia Clines. Somebody thought that was connected, but that's an authored source. I'm not putting much stock by that. And just going forward with the really good clues you found this time. And, your Jacob Cline did say he was born in Virginia, but then the John C. Cline, who the father of all these Clines could have been, said he was born in Pennsylvania, or the census said he was born in Pennsylvania.
Right. And so he could have done that very common migration path down to Virginia, traveled on down to Alabama, Georgia, and then over to Arkansas. We've seen this so many times in our own family and in other client work that we've done, this very similar migration all over the place in the West.
Right. Well, and it does kind of make sense that Cline, isn't that like a German name? And maybe he came from Pennsylvania, like with all the other Germans that went through Pennsylvania?
Absolutely. Likely this is a German connection. I think that actually could correlate really well. And it's possible that this Daniel Cline is a connection.
It's just a future research project.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your conclusion then?
Well, we always go back to address the original objective, and it was to find a possible father. And then I added family for Clemsy because I did find this grouping, and I put that it was met in the discovery of the Izard County Clines, John C. Cline, Mahala Cline, and John Cline in the land and tax records. And then I wrote, Mahala is the connecting link with her appearance also in Morgan County, Missouri, in the 1850 household of Jacob Cline, where Clemsy Cline Weatherford lived nearby and had 2 Cline children in her household. John C. Cline, born about 1785, could certainly be the father of Mahala, Jacob, John, and Clemsy. It's exciting to have found a candidate to research.
Yes, it is fulfilling to have met your objective for this phase of the research.
And one thing that I don't think I mentioned that also was interesting, there was that John Cline in the land patents of Fulton and Pulaski County. Well, there was a John Cline right by Jacob Cline in the 1840 census of Morgan County, Missouri. So there is a John connection there too with this other John Cline that I'm thinking could be another sibling. So,
Right? Another sibling.
and yeah,
Yeah.
and he was in Morgan County as well. So did he go up to Morgan County, then came back down to Arkansas and did a land patent? So I'm just finding some connections between the two counties, which is cool.
That is really good. I just had a thought I had to say. With Jacob Klein going up to Kentucky and then he was a doctor, I wonder if there was some kind of schooling or training he was doing in Kentucky.
Oh, well, that's a good idea. Never even thought of that. And Jacob Klein in that 1850 census does have a son, John M. Klein, and he has a son named Jacob Klein after himself, I'm guessing. And then in Clemsy's household, there's another John Klein. So we're seeing a lot of John Kleins. I mean, John is a common name,
Right.
but
But
still,
if it was their dad's name, of course they would want to use it.
right. I'm just very curious about this family still. And, of course, our next section that we end a report with is future research. That is what I'm super excited about. My future research is going to be some DNA because I have got a nice group of people to try to explore. I've got John C. Cline's household listed. I can do some descendancy work on his household from 1850 and also Mahala and Thomas Shockley's household and see if I can find any DNA connections. Autosomal, I'm going to do a network graph, see if I can find a cluster of Clines that maybe go with these people.
Oh, that would be so gratifying. I hope that that is a successful avenue, and it sounds like it will be. One thing you might want to start doing right now is just adding in these people to your ancestry tree that's attached to your DNA results so that it can start picking up things in through lines.
I know, that's a great idea. I should start doing that because I do have a couple of hours. I have a couple of months before we start the DNA study group, and that's a fun thing to do, to start doing descendancy work in my ancestry tree for these people. So that's exciting.
That is fun. And sometimes it's just kind of easy to, when you're relaxing in your armchair with your laptop, to build descendancy lines down.
Exactly, while you're watching a Hallmark Christmas movie.
Hey, that sounds like fun.
Oh, goodness.
Can I come over?
Yeah, come on up. Well, and I'm also excited to order those land patent applications just to see. I could hit the gold mine and they say something that gives more information. So
Are
it's
you going to
really
get those
fun.
ordered right away, or will you wait until we start the next study group in February?
I think I'll get them ordered right away. My researcher gets them really fast, and I just want to know.
Yeah, no reason to wait. Do it while you've got it on your mind. Right?
Yeah, and I can take a look at those. I can transcribe them, have them all ready to go for analysis and work with the DNA coming up. So it was really gratifying to work through this complete project and to now have so many leads, where before with Clemsy, I just had this idea that there's some clients that she's somehow connected to. Now I've really identified some hypotheses and found some new people. So it's super exciting.
Well, congratulations on a well-written report, and I encourage everyone to go read the Cline Research Project report, and we'll put that in the show notes, which will be up on Family Locket and also in the description of this episode on whatever you're listening to.
Right, and you can go to the blog post that goes with this. I have some screenshots of my Airtable log, and so if you want a little bit more information on that, you can go take a look at that as well. But hopefully you will enjoy reading through the report and seeing how I put all of that kind of complicated, confusing research together, which is always the challenge of a report. But the reason we love writing reports, it is such an important part of the research process. I made so many connections as I was writing this out.
Right.
It was invaluable.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed this, and we will talk to you again next week.
All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.